Greetings, friends. Operational situation at the front on the 21st of February. We will start with you from the Lyman direction. We will talk briefly about the Bakhmut, Avdeevka direction, and of course about Zaporozhye and South Donetsk. According to the Lemansky section of the front, it means that we do not record any changes in the turns and Yampolovka. Active hostilities are continuing in this sector of the front, but it was possible to repel absolutely all attacks by Russian troops, and there were even counterattacks by the AFU in a number of areas, which suggests that, well, in any case, not parity, but what the Russian command conceived, it could not implement, taking into account the latest attacks. Because we are witnessing about the same situation that we have on the Kopensky-Svitovsky sector of the front, where Avdeevka is starch. There have been very active battles for 2 weeks. Subsequently, parity was achieved. It is clear that here the proximity to the thorns themselves, let's say, if you look from the outside, it looks like taking a number of settlements will allow Russian troops to liberate part of their grouping, since there is a natural border in the form of a cascade of stakes. Therefore, the attacks will definitely take assault actions in the western direction. But in recent days, we have seen a really achieved parity on the battlefield, which is actually very good in this sector of the front. We do not record any changes in Bologorovka, as well as in the Bakhmut direction. The main military operations are still taking place in Bogdanovka itself. Again, there was information that the AFU counterattacked a number of positions held by the enemy, and intense fighting continues in the area of Popovsky Forest and east of Ivanovo. Here, just the same, the initiative remains with the Russian troops. They press, they do not reduce the pressure. It would be more correct to say so. They do not reduce the pressure, they put a lot of pressure. South, along the southern flank, without any changes. In the Avdeevka direction, attempts are continuing to improve the tactical situation on the part of the Russian troops, but this time, we are not talking about the eastern outskirts of Lastochen, but about attempts to advance along 2 forest belts, which means north and south of the positions they have already occupied, in order to try to attack with a wider coverage. Therefore, there are attacks from Avdeevsky, as a Sahim, along the road section, it is 0542. A number of them managed to recapture, but in general, the enemy is determined to approach the Swala with the widest possible coverage, and then take assault actions of the settlement itself. To date, we do not record any changes in this sector of the front, as well as in Pervomaysky-Novelsky. Kharkiv direction. So let's start with a victory on changes. Yesterday there was information that the enemy occupied one of the field reservoirs. We talked about him. The vector of his attacks was the smallest, which is one of the goals. When they talked about Georgievka, about the victory, about the area between them, that there were attacks on 2 field reservoirs, and they managed to take one. Then, already today, closer to lunch, information was received from drones visually that the enemy had planted his flag in victory itself on 2nd Street. Therefore, the red zone has been added, and accordingly, the gray zone has increased significantly, because the situation remains on further refinement due to the fact that there are intense battles. It means that in this sector of the front, the enemy managed to advance in a section up to 2 and 3 kilometers wide, to a depth of 157 kilometers. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. And here, we go to St. George's, and start with her, in order to correctly build the information. It means that not only are there fighting in the eastern part of Georgievka, but also the enemy of Smorinka is attacking. If you look at the latest drone footage, artillery strikes are very intense. Artillery strikes are underway on the field reservoir, the neighboring one, from which they occupied the vectors of the Russian troops in this direction as well. In other words, here, we see an attempt just as much as possible, including to align the front line and attack Georgievka, but not through the Garden Association, which we talked about, because there is a serious fortified area there, but to try to bypass this fortified area. So this is one moment. The second point is that we spoke for the field reservoir, that they would try to bypass the victory from it and attack from 2 directions. Yes, this information, unfortunately, we talked about it a few weeks ago with you, and unfortunately, this information turned out to be true. In other words, does it mean that the enemy has committed? Not only did he attack along a stretch of road, he was 0532 in the direction of victory. Having occupied a field reservoir, he was able to bypass a number of positions, respectively, hitting not only head-on, but also trying to flank. But this in principle would have been the same frontal strike, because they could not reach the flank, but still from two directions. If we speak for the north, they attacked the victory. In addition to all this, there are still positions east of the settlement. There was also pressure here. From the fields, Russian troops attacked initially in the direction of the farm, then from victory. It was here that we managed to reach a flanking strike. Therefore, the situation is very, very difficult in this sector of the front. The whole victory is not controlled by Russian troops. There are still fighting going on. But for now, I will be objective. I do not predict anything good. Why? Because, well, there's a minimal part of this victory left. And victory itself is a village of 4 streets, one of which there are only 3 houses there. Therefore, it is still difficult to talk about serious counterattacks. Why? Because the enemy, do not forget, has superiority in artillery and aviation. That's why he uses it here. At the same time, we see that the pressure has increased. Well, roughly speaking, let's talk for a period of 24 hours on Novomykhailovka in the same period. What is the opponent trying to implement? There are a number of, therefore, his attacks on this sector of the front. They are also going north of Novomykhailovka, and we will conditionally call attempts to break through to Praskovivka, because these are attacks in the field area. Perhaps it was an attempt to circumvent the victory from the south, these attacks south of Marenko, which were undertaken. But in any case, the enemy attacks with the widest possible coverage. In other words, it is necessary to react naturally to all these blows, to restrain them, because the same blow to the south is small. So an attempt to circumvent, let's say, in the direction of Raskovivka, it could be an attempt to circumvent victory. Therefore, all attacks have to be repelled, and naturally this disperses our forces, our artillery, which is what the Russian command is betting very heavily on. We have already talked about this with you, that their main task is to maximize the dispersion of the AFU forces, not only in this sector of the front, but in very, very many areas. Difficult situation. Well, for Novomykhailovka itself, there are now assault operations along Timiryozov Street, along the street located to the north, in the direction of the center. Approximately this area is where the enemy is attacking now. Whether he will be able to gain a foothold, it will already be in the context. I think we will see in more detail in 24 hours. But now he is conducting an assault. Not the ones that were before, namely, I repeat, he is pushing hard, and he has transferred additional forces, and accordingly uses tactical aviation. And here, it should be noted that not only victory, not only Georgiev. In general, the segment from Georgievka to Novomykhailovka, it is now under intense attack by enemy tactical aircraft. In other words, aerial bombs are already being used, as it was before, therefore, active fighting in Avdeevka itself. Then we also stated that there were a lot of strikes on Novomykhailovka and on Georgievka for the same victory, in a number of areas with aerial bombs. And now it's all being resumed and intensified by the Russian troops. This is the situation in this section of the front. We proceed to work on the Zaporozhye section of the front. Here, in principle, we will comment on one point. We said yesterday that the VSO is launching counterattacks, including the western part, where the Russians were captured at that time. For Russians who managed to break into the western part of the work. And to date, more or less visual data has been added, based on visual confirmations. So south of work, we managed to completely knock out the Russian troops with a support. There were 2 videos, then we added a gray zone, so the fortified area is more correct. We went to the fortified area, and the infantry was about in this area. So here, the APU knocked them out, and advanced to a depth of 530 meters, in a section up to 183 kilometers wide. At the same time, the enemy also advanced from Novoprokopovka, or rather gained a foothold in those positions, in positions from which he attacked, including working on a front section up to 202 kilometers wide, to a depth of 650 meters. The situation looks like this. The intensity of the fighting has decreased a little, but do not underestimate the enemy, because we have said that in the area of Novoprokopovka, conditionally Ilchenko in Novoprokopovka, he also concentrated some forces, in order to increase the pressure at work on, and, accordingly, in the near future, he can resume assault operations very serious, as the settlement itself is not working, but also try to move between these settlements, but in an easterly direction. Relatively speaking, to the Surovikin line, to Verbovo. Because there are a number of attacks on one of the landings. Well, actually we have added a red zone here. Along one of the forest belts, he managed to gain a foothold, and accordingly, now the vector of attacks will not be so much on working with this area, as it is to try to apply the tactics when they attack with a wider coverage. And here, everything is going exactly to this, to try to attack with a wide coverage. But first, they need to get a number of positions that are south and southeast of the work itself. Located here is the arrangement we have on this site. It remains quite complicated, but as you can see, there are also positive aspects on the part of the APU, despite the fact that in general the situation is difficult for us on the front. And I will comment on the markets. Yesterday, there were a number of statements not only by Shoigu. There are a number of Russian media resources that have allegedly confirmed these words, that Russian troops have completely knocked out the APU from the settlement to the market. At the same time, there was a statement that some part of them was hiding in the forest in the basements, which did not correspond to their previous message. That is, there is a replica. The cleaning is completed from it, to the market below us, as they said, but at the same time the APU is sitting there. The sweep implies that there is no APU there, or they were captured during the sweep. Well, in general, later in the evening, footage was published that yes, indeed, Russian troops set up a flag and ran away. In other words, there is such an informational struggle with the installation of flags. A number of Russian military officers, referring to the fighters from the field, denied this information, as the same Vonko Romanov. I inform you that all this does not correspond to reality. That is, yes, there really is such a moment. They ran in, set up a flag in one place, shot a video about what was allegedly on the market under them, and then ran away, as our media resources published. Therefore, there is such a moment. This is all an information war, and I have already told you repeatedly on my broadcasts that it is better to watch everything late. Why? Because now, there will be a lot of stuffing. If the same victory turned out to be a fact, yes, then the neighboring plots. A lot of applications are going on the same swallows that they took him on. Remember the typical Sinkovku. In the 23rd year, they have made statements more than 10 times, Russian military officers. This is all an information war. Therefore, it is better to look late than to wind up that everything is gone. The situation is complicated, but not as much as the enemy wants to present it in the course of his information war. There are fighting going on for Krinky. There are attacks from the Russian troops, indeed, and with the support of armored vehicles, judging by the footage published by the Magyar fighters, or rather by the Magyar aerobombers. So, but it is possible to beat them all off. In other words, we do not record any changes here at all. This is the situation we have in relation to the markets.